that is what makes you fun on a podcast, is like not necessarily cracking jokes, but just saying the honest thing in the moment.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that honest thing in the moment that gets laughs is something that's kind of racist, is something that's kind of sexist, is something that's not politically correct. But you're not thinking that. You're thinking what's going to make people laugh. Like, what do I honestly believe? And that is what people laugh at. It's like, sure, polite society, your 9-to-5 job has evolved, progressed past all of that, but human beings haven't. We still laugh at all the same stuff. It's just, it's now considered like impolite.
Welcome to the Veritas podcast. I'm Scott Veritas, and today I'm joined by podcaster and comedian Chrissie Mayr. Chrissie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's super exciting to talk to you, Chrissie. I love talking to comedians. Comedians are great people, especially real comedians. What I mean by that is... Is it
because you feel better about your life? You go, oh my God, like I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not living in a basement. Yeah.
It's just because comedians are... I mean, if they're real comedians, which I consider you like a real comedian, and what I mean by that is someone who's actually funny and who actually tries to be funny. And people like that are great to talk to on my show, because my show is all about like being honest, like cutting to the core of things. And, you know, and I love it when my guests are funny as well. I had Francis Foster on a few months ago. He's really funny. He's the host of Trigonometry and a comic as well.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the inventor of Bananas Foster. Should be
I'm afraid not.
I am familiar with. So,
but you might like the show Trigonometry. Actually, I don't know if you ever checked it. It's British.
What triggers people?
Yeah, it's like I would compare it to like the Rubin Report with Dave Rubin. It's like similar kind of guests, that sort of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, then I definitely would like that.
Yeah. But yeah, he's a comic. He's great. And you are so funny, and it's so great to have you. I want to start off kind of along those lines, just asking you, how did you initially, well, not so much how did you get into comedy, but what I'm really interested in is why did you go into comedy? What actually made you want to be a comedian?
I think I never thought that I could pursue comedy and like make a living from it. That was never a thought when I was getting into it. I just was like, I think unconsciously I had this need to like be heard and understood, and at the same time like I had these very much like performer instincts, like this bug. Like a lot of people would like, if I describe this, there might be some guys who'd be like, oh, she has daddy issues, oh, she's an attention whore, oh, she's the kind of girl that needs all the eyes on her, nobody else. And I don't know if it was like that. Like, I know when I was little, and we'd be going to church, I would be in like the church play, and I played like a sheep, and I really like made the most of that role. Like, I just was like, I'm just gonna like baa my heart out and just strut down this pew or whatever.
You were an excellent
and, like,
sheep, I'm sure.
Yeah, the cotton balls would be kind of falling off, and I really just like, I was like, I gave it my all. No role is too small. And I think at one point, even when I was too young to be in like any of the church plays, I would go up on stage, because I'm the youngest of three, before anybody was on stage. Like, this is my very like earliest memory of kind of like being on stage. I would go up with like a paper bag in my like this, and I would call it, and this is, I don't really remember this that much. Like, I remember being on stage, but I don't remember what the hell I was doing. And like my parents and grandparents would tell me like, yeah, you had this paper bag on your hand that you referred to as Danny the donkey, and then you would sort of puppeteer this paper bag in front of the crowd, and they'd be like, oh, is this part of the show? And it's like, no, you just get up there and do it. And then they had to kind of like yank you off, and then eventually I think my parents got me and like actual puppets. Like, there were these like, and they might have been my grandmother's, because they were Stife brand, which is a very old brand of like stuffed animal. Like, I'm sure you could find vintage versions that are like worth a lot of money. But I just was like, oh, and then people would be like, oh my God, I thought I was fooling people that I had a real cat. It was like this black cat puppet, and I would talk to it, and like people would be like, oh my God, is that a real cat? And I'd be like, oh, I'm fucking crushing it. These people think this is a real cat. Like, this is great. Like, this is going to keep this up. So that was fun for me. And then like, I think from an early age, I'm like, okay, I like making people laugh.
Yeah.
And part of it was because of like my sort of family dynamics, and like my parents were always married. They never got divorced. So it's like, when I say like, oh, they would fight, my perception as a kid is that they would fight kind of often, usually about money. they'd go their separate ways to like cool down. My parents wouldn't really like communicate and like work their problems out. They just would sort of disperse. Like my dad would just like scram, like leave the house, and my mom and my sister and my brother would kind of be doing his own thing, but oftentimes it would be like me, my mother, and sister, and we'd be hanging out, and then like I would notice I could make her laugh. Like I could make my mom laugh, and I was like, oh, I can kind of perk her up when she's down after these fights. Like I think this is, you know, kids are always looking for the ways in which they bring the most value to their parents, the people who are responsible for like keeping them alive, right? And it just was like, oh, okay, this is something I can do really well. I can like make her laugh, and I'm like, I can make my sister laugh really well, and it just was like, this is something I can do. So it did kind of become this like, you lean into your strengths, right? It's like, I just loved hearing the laughs, and I was like, okay, whatever I can do to be like goofy or silly, and so I was definitely leaning towards that. As I got older, I wasn't really into theater in high school. I did like one play, which had like no lines in it. It was a funny thing that happened on the way to the Forum. The casting process was literally, we had this like burnout of a theater director, Larry Waxman, and there was a bunch of us girls on stage. I was, I think, a junior in high school, and he went like, you, and you, and that was the casting process for this play. Like literally, he would look us up and down, and that's how we were chosen. Which was good, which is actually kind of a huge compliment that I didn't really understand at the time. And so I was cast to be a courtesan, which is a fancy word for prostitute, for a funny thing that happened on the way to the Forum. And that was fun, too. I kind of was like, I enjoyed being in that one play. I was like, okay, cool, this is like the spotlight. I'm not the lead. I don't have all these lines to memorize, but I'm on stage. I'm in a costume. This is cool. And went to college, obviously. I was like, I guess I'll get a communications degree. I had no clue what to do with that. My mom was like, maybe you could work in a hotel. Wow. Like that was her greatest goal for me, is that maybe one day I could work in a hotel. So when I was in college, I ended up I thought I wanted to be a news reporter, so I got an internship at Dateline at NBC. As soon as I get there, I go, this is so boring. This is the furthest thing from what I want to be, but I was able to get myself an internship for the following year at Late Night with Conan O'Brien, because it was still when Conan was doing his show out of New York before he moved to L.A. I reached out to the only female staff writer at the time, Allison Silverman, and was like somehow able to secure myself an internship, which is like kind of amazing looking back. I think I just got really lucky because during the summer it's almost impossible to get one of these internships at NBC because you're competing with all of the sons and daughters of the guys and girls that work there, you know. Everyone's free, and during the fall and spring semesters is when it's really like the internships are limited to like whoever's college is like in commuting distance to New York City, which I went to Fairfield in Connecticut, so it worked out. I got college credit, and that's when I first realized like, oh, I really like love comedy people. Like it was exciting to be at 30 Rock twice a week. It was exciting to take the train in. I was like totally intimidated by the subways. I hadn't, even though I'm from Long Island, like my family was not like, let's go to the city and see a show. No, it's like we were like kind of, you know, blue collar, sort of like middle class family. So we were never like going into the city to like take in the culture. My parents were not like, let's take these kids to a museum. It's like, no, every summer they would just like drop us off at the pool and be like, all right, we'll see you at 5, you know. But it was great because I, you know, became a Division I springboard diver, so it's like that was a decent way to spend summers. But that internship at Conan was when I really realized, like, okay, comedy people are really my people, because this feels like my comfort zone. This is fun. I really looked up to like everybody who worked on the show. I really was like, wow, maybe one day I could be a PA. Now looking back, a PA is like one of the worst jobs. You know, it's like entry level grunt work, which is what us interns were doing. It's just like we're getting coffee, you know, we're just getting stuff that Conan needs randomly, like printing stuff out. Like it was considered a big deal as an intern to be like considered, like if you were doing dinner, that was like the highest honor. You'd be in charge of like, all right, we're going to order from City Lobster. You have to go get all of the writers' orders. You have to write it all down. You have to like nail it. You have to, I think at the time, honestly, we were like faxing the orders in. It's not even that long ago. It was like 2005, but I think this is pre Uber Eats. This is pre like most digital ordering. So I think that these, And like NBC, you know, these networks were crusty probably for like, they were never going to be like in what do you call it, an early adapter of like, you know, apps or ordering, or like online ordering. So I'm sure that they had their old system of like calling it in or faxing in these orders, and then it would come, and like, oh my God, if you got to order yourself a meal, the biggest fuck, you know what I mean? Like, ooh, I ordered myself a $20 dinner. It would, I guess it just didn't take a lot to impress me, is what I'm realizing more and more so. Like, if it's like one of the comedy writers would like hand me a $20 bill and they go, here's my coffee order and get something for yourself, I'd be like, holy shit, you know? I'd be like, I could get my, and and it's like the first time I really started going to Starbucks, and I was like, for me at the time, like the fancy coffee drink that I would get if one of these writers, comedy writers, would say, get whatever you want, because I'd be like, okay, I want to get something fancy because he said get whatever you want, but at the same time, I don't want to like break the bank on this guy.
Yeah.
We just have a 20 here, so I would get what I thought was such a fancy Starbucks drink, which was like a sugar-free vanilla skim latte. And I just fancy. Like, it was such a fake, syrupy, like shitty artificial taste, but I just was like, I got to get myself one of those, and I'd like march back, and you really just going down into the subway to the Starbucks in Rockefeller Center. You're just like going underground, and then they'd be like, can you handle taking the subway to go to Broadway Video and pick something up? And like, I don't even remember what was there. I think maybe that's where they stored the files, I don't know, something having to do with like storing the shows over there, getting equipment or something. But it was so exciting. You're like around these famous people. I remember, what was this band called? I learned so much about, like, it was like the first time I was around celebrities and like famous people, kind of, you know, I'd be kind of lurking. You'd like walk. Every show's on a different floor, you know, and I'd be like walking along like the show floor. I never got to like sit in the showroom or anything like that, but you kind of walk past it. Slipknot was the name of this band that was performing on Conan one night, and it was so funny because like, they were like the PAs, or you know, they take their jobs very seriously, and they're like, all right, well, the drummer of Slipknot, he's been known to during performances relieve himself while in his seat. So I remember it was a big deal. They were all talking about, like, what are we going to do for when this man pees on our stage, like, in the seat while they're performing. Oh, they're only doing a couple songs. Well, he still might pee. So then they had to, like, cover the seat in plastic. They had to put, like, I think they're talking about maybe doing to put plastic on the floor. Oh, but we don't want to insult the man. And I was just like, this is showbiz, baby. Woo, this is fun. And just seeing, like, the, you know, the wardrobe racks wheel by, and like, you know who I thought were the coolest people were like the crew guys. Maybe because they reminded me of my dad, but the sort of quietly confident, chill, like Carhartt wearing like crew dudes, like the sound guy I thought was really cool. Not necessarily like the celebrities, because like, oh, they're full of themselves. But I just thought the guys that worked on the shows were very cool, because they're the type of guys that like they see a lot, but they're like quiet about it. And I wonder if it was because my dad was a Teamster at that time. Same kind of thing, you know, like he would see it all. He would drive around like the lighting truck or the makeup truck or the prop truck, you know, get up at like all hours in the morning, 5 a.m. to get the trucks in position to then, you know, not be needed for another 7 hours or something. And again, you're like, you know, you work crazy, like 15-hour days, second dinner, and I just was like, oh, wow, like they're around show business. It's grueling, but they're not like fame whores. So I just noticed a lot of like how you know, the inner workings behind the scenes about like showbiz, which was really cool to me. But I was like, oh, funny people. These are my people, absolutely more so than news people. Like, what am I going to do? And then I was talking to, and you figure, like, there's so many interns that come in and out every semester. I'm sure they think we're all annoying. Like, I remember Max Weinberg, who was the drummer for Conan's band at the time, and I guess he's a pretty famous drummer. Like, I don't know if he was Bruce Springsteen, part of his Bruce Springsteen's band. Like, I really should know this. Like, he's considered very famous, but he was such a dick that I think I blocked out, like, what his historical relevance is. And I remember this because I was this other girl named Melanie. We were both interns, and this was the same intern class as like Ellie Kemper, who went on to be in The Office and like so many other movies. And I'll never forget because she interned, like she was a little bit older. She was like 26 and I was like a senior in college. So I'm like 20, 21, maybe I was 20 years old because I'm like younger. I have like a younger birthday.
Okay.
And I was like, she's a little old to be here. And then it's so funny because she ended up meeting Michael Cohen, who's a writer on Conan, and now they're married. So it's like so long ago. I was there, and I'm like, like watching these, not like watching them get together, but like so many people kind of sprung up out of this like intern class. This girl, Liz Mealy, who was a stand-up comic, who went on, she started stand-up at like 16. And I was like, oh, wow, the idea of stand-up seemed so intimidating to me at the time when I was, like, working on Conan. But I was like, okay, I know a couple people who are stand-ups. All right, maybe. It's the idea of what I thought it was so distant and scary from now what I realized, like, being a stand-up is you're just being yourself on stage. It's really not. It's so simple,
Yeah.
And then I would talk to some of the writers, and this guy, Jose Arroyo, who was, like, the coolest. This guy, Brian Stack, he might still work with Conan. He did a lot of, like, the bit character parts. But this guy, Jose, he gave me a book about, like, comedy writing, and maybe he wrote in it or signed it in. It was, like, very meaningful to me. And all these comedy writers were like, well, if you're into this, if you want to do this, you got to get into improv. And I had done maybe like a semester of improv in college, but I wasn't a theater kid. I wasn't a theater major, so I was kind of, you're not really welcomed, unless you're a theater kid. I don't know if it was this theater director or how all college improv is. I don't know. But I did it enough to be like, this is fun. So as soon as I graduated, I started up with the UCB Theater in New York City. They've now gone bankrupt over the pandemic, because it's just like, hey, turns out when you have 2-year lockdowns, people are losing their jobs, like, people are not going to have $400 to spend on an improv class anymore. Yeah. But I went during, like, the heyday. I started at UCB, like, right when I graduated, so, like, 05. Did all the classes, a team, a show, all the things, and then I did the Magnet Theater, which is another improv theater in New York City, all the classes, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then after I completed those classes, I did a one-woman show at Magnet, and that was like really hard work. I had like 2 different directors. I remember I would rehearse in like the Drama Bookshop in Times Square, which is a very theater person space. Like they sell scripts, they sell music. It's like that's theater people, and it's very cool that I've had like exposure to all these different kind of like entertainment cliques. So I'm rehearsing this one-woman show in this like shitty small like drama bookstore, and I do the one-woman show I think for about like 6 weeks. It was the most work I'd ever done. I'm like memorizing lines. I did like 6 different characters which were based on like women I'd gone to school with or my hairdresser or like, and it was cool. And after that I realized like, wow, I just did an hour on stage. Like I can definitely, I think, do stand-up. I think I could do like 5-10 minutes of stand-up, which is what you start out doing. Mm-hmm. And then I just started doing open mics, and that was now like 10-11 years ago. And I just didn't give up, which is a quality that I had honestly from like sports, like you become okay with like rejection, sucking, and
a lot of bombing.
A lot of bombing. You just keep going. That doesn't mean you stop just because you suck at it. Like if you're having fun and you're seeing some progress, yeah, absolutely keep going. And like looking back, I think what really attracted me to stand up, like, because it was a real transition. Like, was stand up attracted me because I was like, oh, this is very autonomous. It's not like with improv where it's like you need to rent a room, rent a coach, have a team. There's 8 to 10 of you, or 5, 6, 7, 8, of you. And at the end of the day, you're only performing once a week. The performance kind of hinges on whoever you're, you know what I mean? Like, you're only as good as your worst player on an improv team. If you do great, you're kind of sharing the glory. But if you bomb, you can be like, oh, it was the scene partner. Whereas a stand-up, the glory is all yours, but the bombs are all yours too. The stakes are higher. But I was like, this is great because I can just do a bunch of open mics in one night. I don't have to rent a room. I don't have to, you don't have to put a lot of money out. And like, also I was living home paying $400 per improv class. That's like 6 to 8 weeks. that one's up. You sign up for the next one. And I did that for 5 years. And the weekends are spent just sitting on the floor of the UCB, like watching Ass Cat, watching all these big-time improvisers who then go on. I thought they were so big and famous. Like, at best, they ended up in commercials or, you know, on maybe a couple of other, like, improv shows or maybe, like, you know, some small role. I think the most famous improv person I sort of, like, watched was, like, Zach Woods, who went on to do Silicon Valley. He's done, like, a couple other movies. But it was very cool for, like, a period of years to be like, I know him. Like, my boyfriend is always like, I'd be like, oh, my God. And he'd be like, let me guess, you know him from improv? And I'd be like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like...
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the appeal for you was just being around a certain type of person. I mean, from the get-go, it seems like you're like, comedy people are my people. And it's funny that you were around news people for a little while. I had an experience where I was a mass comm poli-sci double major in college, wanted to be a journalist or maybe a PR hack. I don't know why the hell I wanted to be a PR hack at one point. I don't know what was into me at the
Nobody
time.
knows what they want to be when they're 17, 18 years old. Why anyone goes to college anymore is the dumbest idea. You're only going to leave in debt and, like, and with an STD. Like, that's what college is for. Debt and STDs.
I don't know
and
which
bad
one's worse.
hand jobs. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny because I graduated in 2017. I feel like I was at the tail end of before like a whole new slew of people found out how kind of bad of a decision college generally is. I think I was at the very end of where everyone was like, you got to go to college or you're a loser. I was like,
oh,
right
yeah, it was
at the
still
end of that.
cool when I went. It was still like, you got to go, you know?
No, you were a loser if you didn't go. Now it's starting to finally switch. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this idea of like being around the right kind of people, because that's something I can definitely relate to, and I'm betting that a lot of people in my audience can. What do you think really separates the kind of person that excites you, a comedian in particular? What do you think separates comedy people from just kind of like, let's just say, for lack of a better term, boring everyday people?
It's honesty. It is because like a lot of people are funny and don't necessarily make jokes. They just say the honest thing in the moment as soon as it comes to their mind. Like, and also I think the way that I was raised, we avoided honesty in my family growing up. It was a lot of tiptoeing around feelings, but we would be very sarcastic because when you're not like, it's like any couple who's like, you know, if you've been in a little bit of a toxic relationship, you know this. It's like you hold back your feelings, but then you say that undercutting random statement, or like you find yourself like, whoop, you're like something that's kind of insulting. Oh, just kidding, you know. It's like, oh, you say the quiet part out loud sometimes. And just with my family dynamics, we're very sarcastic to one another, just kind of shitting on each other kind of all the time. And kind of watching my parents interact honestly was like a huge template, you know, like he walks out of the room and then we're like immediately talking shit. It's like there was something kind of funny about it. It sucked for their marriage, but it was fun. It was funny to be like a part of the shit talking. And then I started comedy with mostly men who had a men bond, kind of by shit talking, kind of by ribbing each other. A lot of my friends were guys, so it's just like maybe I was a little bit more of like a tomboy, and it's like I always had guy friends. I just feel like I socially related more to them. It was like easier for me. Like girls are a little bit like, you gotta suck up to girls to be like friends with them. A lot of compliments. A lot of like, can we go get nails? Okay.
And guys are a little more blunt, like a little more of that kind of brutal honesty. I think you're gonna find.
I think when there was like kind of a lack of honesty in my house growing up, that's what stand-up really attracted to me. And like, I was just like, oh, the stakes are very low. Yes, it's what usually scares a lot of people about stand-up and public speaking is like, oh my God, what are these people going to think of me? Strangers, I don't know them. That's what attracted it to me. I was like, that's what's cool to me. I'm like, wow, strangers. I don't have to worry about their feelings. I don't have to worry about seeing these people again. You know what I mean? Like, I can make fun of somebody in the front row, and like, you know, it doesn't mean I have to tiptoe around them back at the house later. So it was cool to me because it was like the stakes were low. I can kind of be myself, take risks. I guess I didn't feel that way at home. I felt like I had to really take care of other people's feelings, and like kind of care for others, almost in the way that like kids sometimes feel like they have to be the parent, you know. I just didn't feel like I don't know. And also sometimes too, I mean, like my dad was a German immigrant, so it was like, oh, if you're cold, I'm cold, Dad, can we turn up the heat? No, put up a sweater, put on a sweater. So it was like part of the, like, looking back, I'm like, all right, he was an immigrant. He had, like, maybe he was in, like, a depression mode. But as a kid, you get the feeling like, oh, nobody cares about my feelings or wants or needs, I just have to suck it up. So maybe a little bit growing up with this feeling of, like, you're not that important, which is good. I mean, some humbling is good. We see what happens with kids when they think they're too fucking important.
Mm.
So, and there's just something, it's nice. I guess I gravitated towards being around other sarcastic, brutally honest, blunt people. It's just fun. Because you know when someone's bullshitting you, and it's like, it's better to be around people who are real. And yeah, because I was always working corporate day jobs. Always. So I was in both worlds, and I was like, okay, I work my 9 to 5, and then I would either leave to go to an improv class, or I'd be leaving to immediately go do stand-up for hours and hours, and then go home, fall asleep, do it all over again. So I was always in both worlds, and I was like, okay, I always know that what happens after I leave my job is like what gets me going, like what I want to live for.
It's what's real.
Yeah. So, and I'm really grateful I was able to, like, live home and pay for the improv classes, which, like, gave me the skills, which I think helped me with stand-up. And I think those improv skills helped when I started doing podcasts, because a stand-up can be funny, but if you don't have a quick wit, if you don't, and it's like you have to just follow that impulse, which a lot of comedians don't have. But that is what makes you fun on a podcast, is, like, not necessarily cracking jokes, but just saying the honest thing in the moment.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that honest thing in the moment that gets laughs is something that's kind of racist, is something that's kind of sexist, is something that's not politically correct. But you're not thinking that. You're thinking, what's going to make people laugh? Like, what do I honestly believe? And that is what people laugh at. It's like, sure, polite society, your 9 to 5 job has evolved, progressed past all of that, but human beings haven't. We still laugh at all the same stuff. It's just, it's now considered, like, impolite to do so.
Well, and there's a very uncomfortable, it's interesting you brought up, like, being in a corporate, kind of 9 to 5 world, being in a different world. I can definitely relate to that. I do have a 9 to 5 job. I won't trash talk them on this show. That's just asking for it, but I hope they never find
you,
it.
And then let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe. But I can relate to the idea that, you really get the sense that, for a big portion of your day, you kind of have to be very robotic, and you don't get to say what you really thinking.
You don't get to be yourself. You
just
have
can't.
to squelch and stifle your personality.
And it sucks. And then you go into, every day I sign off work, and all of a sudden I'm listening to, like, Legion of Skanks. That's my personal favorite. I'm constantly listening to Legion.
Great.
And
that's
it's like,
awesome.
I'm sitting there thinking, like, man, and actually, what the funny thing is, the poster behind me, one of them is an oil painting of the Skank Boys, and the one that's not Zelda. And this is also the desk that I work from, and so my coworkers...
Have you ever been to the Skank Fest?
I have not. I'll see if maybe, I don't know. I probably won't be able to make the Vegas one, but maybe next year. I have to see if I can get some friends to rally around and go to it.
Yeah, there'll always be more. Yeah.
But my coworkers could see that poster, and they've asked me, like, oh, what's that poster of? And I know that if I told them the name of the show, just the name, they'd be like...
They would just look it up, or they would
and then
be
they'd
like,
find
they would
it.
judge you.
And so I'm always like, oh, it's just something a friend gave me. It's guys smoking cigars. I don't know. It's like poker or something. I don't know. And I'm just...
you should tell people, Scott, I painted it at a drink and draw, and then the questions will completely stop, because everyone knows exactly what that is. I took a date there. Yeah, it's a still life.
Yeah, something to throw them off the scent. But it's interesting that the way that we have to wildly vacillate between, because I think you're a comedian and a podcaster. I mean, you kind of get to be yourself more than I think the average person. I'd say even I get to do that, just because I have sort of liberated myself from certain mindsets. Even when I am at work, I try not to. But what I'm really curious about is, like, what do you think is happening in our world where it does seem like there's a huge gulf between how people really feel and what they're saying, even outside of work. And that's really the key, is that it seems like there are a lot of conversations that you'll have with people where if you're in a group of, let's say, like 6 or 7 people, they're going to say one thing. But if they're one-on-one with like someone like me or you that they know is like a little more free-spirited, let's say, then all of a sudden they're like, actually, this is what I really think. Like, what do you make of that? Like, why is it that it almost feels like in certain settings people are constantly being held hostage emotionally and intellectually, and like they're unable to tell the truth, to tell jokes, and it just makes the whole social world life experience less fun. And that's what really kills me about it, is that people talk about politics. My show is generally about politics. But one of the things I hate most is it seems like the world is just less fun because we're not allowed to be as honest as we were 5, certainly 10 years ago. And that switch occurred so quickly.
I think you know the answer to this, Scott. It's social media. Well, humans have always been afraid of rejection, of being the one left out. Like, look at what's been happening the last 2 years. All of the propaganda coming at us from the government is designed to make us feel alone. If you're not falling in line with the group, with the mob mentality, you deserve to be shamed. You deserve to be fired. You deserve to be unfriended, uninvited. Not asked to Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So, humans have always been afraid of being shamed, not fitting in. And there's even an example of like why zebras are, they travel together and their stripes, like they've survived because when zebras are all together, they all look the same, and a predator can't pick out one or the other because all the stripes kind of like blend together. And like human beings are kind of that way socially, like with behavior. Like, I don't know. This is going on YouTube. I'm like trying not to get your channel.
You can. I curse a lot on my. I haven't even really looked up the words I'm not supposed to say.
I just mean as far as talking about lockdowns and like the jab and stuff.
Yeah, I guess the more we say COVID, the more they fucking you can pretty much say what you want, Chrissy. I'm gonna let you.
We can keep it about comedy because it's interesting. Like psychologically, people's sense of humor have not changed. And laughs are pretty much involuntary. Like you try to stifle a laugh, it's hard to. It doesn't feel good to do it. And the problem is obviously like social media. Like think about the golden era of stand up or of comedy. It was like the 80s and the 90s, and it was like a comic could work something out, be really dirty, really racist, whatever, and it would stay on stage. And now it's like you could just take a video of somebody working something out, get it out there. Now it's like regular people or all people feel like, okay, I have the power to cancel somebody like in my pocket, and at any point you can share a joke from a set or tape somebody on stage. And not even comedians, like you can cancel your coworker, with forwarding an email to HR with reporting, oh, this is something I heard outside the bathroom. Even regular ass compliments can be construed to be some kind of a Me Too or sexual harassment. Not like that of course that's actually can be going on too, but now it's like there's something about a type of toxic woman that will totally take advantage of the Me Too movement, because it's like when women don't feel powerful, and men too, but when a certain type of woman doesn't feel powerful in her own life and comfortable in her own skin, there's going to be something very attractive to her about the power dynamics of like a Me Too or reporting someone to HR or like a Karen who's trying to cancel somebody.
Well, because there's a ton of power there. I mean, there doesn't have to be any truth to it at all. You barely even have to present. You don't have to present any evidence. So the power is unbelievable. Yeah,
and I find the canceling is very attractive to someone who doesn't have a lot of like power over their own life or control over their own life. Like so much of this is like projection, right? So I find the people that are, just from observing, the people who are shittiest to me online, the biggest trolls, it's like you do a little bit of like, oh, you click on their profile.
They're sad people.
They're sad, or they wanted to be a comedian deep down, never had the guts to try, or they've always had a day job or kids. It's like, guess what? I've always had a day job. I didn't let that stop me. Like, literally, there are no excuses. There's nothing keeping you from pursuing your dreams a little by little, an inch every day. You know what I mean? Like, it's all you have to, don't compare yourself to other people. Just compare yourself to you from last year. And I notice the people who are hardest on me are either like comedians who are doing worse than me, or people who just never had the balls to go for it.
Or some journalist who's making $38,000 a year.
Of course, like, right, the boos always come from the cheap seats. I'm never going to, Dave Chappelle is never going to troll me on Twitter, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you're not a real comedian. It's like, it's going to be a guy who's been doing it twice as long who has a quarter of the following that I have. So you take into consideration, okay, like, where is this criticism coming from? And yeah, like, who's giving it to you? So, yeah, your question about, like, why can't people be honest? People are afraid of being cast out of their group, fired, you know. We didn't even, it doesn't even have to, like, apply to comedy necessarily or what people find funny. Like, just look at, like, how people who voted for Trump were treated, you know. It's, I don't know why. I guess there's something attractive about having power over another person, whether it's, like, you out them politically or you donated money to the trucker convoy, or you have an American flag up, or you know, it's really sick. It's like, I think it's something that's attractive to people who want to feel powerful.
Yeah.
And it's a quick fix instead of doing the necessary work in your life to, like, lead a powerful life.
Yeah, and I think there's two elements to it, Chrissy, because the power element that you're talking about is huge, but there's also a sense of sort of like moral purity and moral superiority, which is a form of exercising power, but I think it goes deeper into someone's psyche, where not only can they feel like they can dominate someone, and maybe they're not very dominating in other aspects of their lives, they're kind of meek and they have to be very, you know, submissive, whether it's to their boss, to their girlfriend, to their wife, to their whatever, you know, to their mother or father. I think there's also an element of people who have never really done anything morally excellent or virtuous, if you will. They've never really done anything that made them feel like the hero in their own story. They're just kind of living this, they're an NPC, you know, they're just kind of a background character. They're not the hero. And so they see this opportunity to be, you know, part of the resistance, right? It's like, oh, I can be one of the good guys. The resistance.
Oh, all for show. It's like the cardboard cutout version of you. It's so easy to just prop it up. But all you have to do is, like, look behind it, and you're like, oh, that's just one dimensional.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I never understand. Like, I see comedians and, I don't know, maybe, like, colleagues or friends, like, so quick to brag about their accomplishments online or on Facebook. And I mean, Facebook is on its death rattle, honestly. But I'm just like, I just don't like the idea of, like, bragging about my accomplishments. I'd so much rather just, like, keep my head down, work hard. People who know, people who notice. It's so important to, like, be humble, because I see the people who have, like, just blown up, become really big, and it's like, oh, they don't answer. We used to be friendly. They don't answer my messages anymore, and it's always good to remember, like, you know, who you pass on the way up is who you're gonna see on the way back down, and, like, you know, I really do I remember who's a dick to me, and it's just like,
You got the internal shit list going. Everybody's got it.
I do. I have currently a brown list going. Not that it's, like, you know, I think it's just interesting. It's always good to be, like, humble wherever you're at, and I don't know how we got here from talking about, like, canceling, but yeah, and that's the thing, is it's easier to be honest with that one person, even if they're not fully on board. The stakes are lower, because it's like, you can explain yourself with one person. It's like, if you're in a group of, like, 5, 6, you may not have time to, like, get to them individually and be like, oh, this is what I meant, or, like, you know what I mean, just kidding. And a little bit is, like, probably most people's fear of kind of public speaking, and the more people that are there, the more sort of public speaking it feels.
Yeah. Well, when it comes back to that fear of judgment that comedians just really can't have, that you were talking about before, comedians are interesting people because they have to be ready to offend people if they're going to try and make them laugh. And frankly, the people who are going to try and make you laugh are more fun to hang out with. I mean, just on the social level, like I was talking about, like we were talking about, when you're in a group of 5 or 6 people, who do you want to hang out with? The person who's funny, the person who's honest. I just feel like even on just a social level, we've got a very bizarre thing going on where it's like we're in some kind of dictatorship, and we don't want to speak poorly of dear leader, but, like, everybody knows the emperor has no clothes, right? It's so strange to me. It hits me really hard when I think about how quickly it kind of changed, because it feels like, particularly in the comedy industry, let's take comedy as an example, it feels like it wasn't that long ago that comedy was all about, like, pushing boundaries. You know, like it's all, on some level, it's all about free speech. It's about walking the line of offensiveness, sticking a toe over that line, seeing what you can get away with, seeing what you can make funny that isn't inherently funny. Like, obviously, the Holocaust is not inherently funny. You have to be a lunatic to think that. But is it possible to tell a funny Holocaust joke? Of course it fucking is. Like, it's possible to tell a funny joke about anything. But it seems like we've kind of sacrificed those core concepts, or even the idea that language has context. Look at Joe Rogan's whole N-word controversy for, you know, a classic case of that. It seems like we've sacrificed those ideas which were so important to comedy and to just having fun. How do you think? How do you think it happened so quickly?
The Joe Rogan thing is like, there are very sort of intelligent, like, forces. I think they know what looks, and now we're at a point where we've been able to study social media long enough. It's like, all right, we know what it takes to take someone down on social media. We know what kind of clips and what kind of visuals that are enough to give a bad impression. Like, it's we've been online long enough to, like, you really know how to take someone down if you're paying attention. And so, like, you can either be afraid of that, or you know, and people can argue over whether Joe Rogan should be like, oh, fuck it, I do whatever I want. You know, I'm not going to censor these 115 some odd episodes with other comedians. Like, who knows what deal he really has going on with Spotify, and people can judge him all they want. And the thing is, it's like, well, there's never been a Joe Rogan. There's never been a person in this situation before. Like, he's doing the most no one has ever had this position before that he has, and I think he's, you know, you do what you can with the information you have at the time. No one's perfect. No one, you know, the people who shit on Joe Rogan, oh, you're caving, bro. You know, you're bending the knee, and it's like, well, what the fuck are you doing? What are you doing to promote free speech? Are you talking to people who have been canceled? Are you sticking your neck out at all? So we all have to, like, do what we can. It's like, really, it's so easy to just live your whole life online, and, you know, it's so easy to take away chunks of, like, reality just from your own life. And that's why I think stand-up is so important, because nothing forces you into the present like a stand-up show. A good comic can take the crowd that's in front of them and deliver a totally unique performance that will never happen again, and the crowd will leave being like, well, not only did we laugh, but I felt like we feel seen. We felt like, wow, like, he made fun of my pink shirt. He made fun of my wife. You can't get that from sitting home and watching Netflix.
No.
It's absolutely a circuit of energy. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And it's not passive entertainment.
No, it's a part of the human experience that I'm afraid we're slowly losing grasp of because of all the censorship. Like, I like to go to comedy shows in, I'm just going to say the city where I live. I try not to make it too easy for people to dox me. But, you know, I live in a city with a lot of comedy clubs, and I go to a lot of comedy shows, and I have felt like, you know, like, for instance, one of the comedy clubs I go to, there's,
Are you
like,
in a red state or a blue state?
I'm in a blue state.
Okay.
And so, you know, I go to comedy shows, and there are, for instance, these shows that are supposed to be like the nasty show, like the offensive show. And I'm like, this isn't that, you know, like, I feel like even that show I go there, and I'm like, people are not really doing, you know, it's like the show that's supposed to be offensive isn't even that offensive.
You're left wanting more.
Yeah, that's how you know that it gets...
No one talked about their period in the show. I'm upset.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely gotten the sense, you know, there are certain places that I can go. Your stuff is great. I love Legion of Skanks. I like Cumtown a lot. I think those guys are really funny. But I know it's kind of an acquired taste and an exceptional name.
They have tons of fans.
Yeah. But anyway, it feels like it's getting confined to a smaller space where you can actually really be funny and really be honest. And I kind of fear for the future of not just comedy, but all entertainment, because we've also seen it overflow into movies, into TV shows, into video games, for God's sake. I mean, there was the Frosk thing that I know you are very aware of. But, like, it just seems like all of the different forms of censorship, whether it's identity politics or whatever, they have kind of... I'll put it this way. They've certainly put people in a position where I feel like if somebody is thinking of going into the comedy world today... Like, I'll ask you, Chrissie, if you were, like, currently 21, 22 years old and you had to start in 2022, what do you think would be different for you? Because I feel like it's such a different landscape than even like 5 years ago. What would you do if you had to start now?
I'd be way more social media focused, and like honestly, everyone's got to acknowledge their strengths. And my strengths is like probably a 21-year-old woman getting into comedy. Be like, all right, let's get some thirst traps on social media. Like, let's get a lot of good pictures out there. You'll be booked as the token woman on a lot of shows, and it's like you'll get these spots easily, but you better be funny and back it up, because then you won't get booked again if you're not. So I would be more social media focused. Whereas when I started at 26 years old in 2010. And I was very open mic focused. Like social media was like not huge. Like there was Facebook, but yeah, I did join Twitter like probably in 2007, but I just wasn't paying a lot of attention to my social media following. I was not utilizing YouTube at all. Maybe I should have been putting more clips on, but I really did not find my voice and start to thrive until I started doing podcasts, which is funny because it's something away from stand-up. It's like I was doing podcasts and interviews, and that really filled out like what would become my sort of brand, I guess. So it's you always have as a stand-up, you have to find your something else, because the times of just getting famous and making a living off of stand-up are so long gone. Like maybe in the 80s and the 90s, oh, you're funny, you do a funny set at New York Comedy Club, and then an agent's watching you. You get swept up. You get an agent. You get on Letterman. You get a bunch of road gigs, and then you're making your living. Like that just really doesn't happen for many people anymore. Like, I mean, you have an example. I always use the example of Michael Che. He did stand up for 2 years. He got swept. He got plucked to do Weekend Update, and he's crushing it. He's making a living.
Yeah.
But for stand-ups now, you have to find your something else. It's not enough just to be a funny stand-up anymore. It's like, and you have to look to your interests or your other strengths for what is going to round out what will be your brand. It's like, okay, I'm funny and I'm really into motorcycles. So it's like that, because the something else is going to be where your fans are, because there's just not enough to make a living and have a fan base out of people who just are comedy nerds. It's just, so it's like, for me, I figured out, okay, I'm funny, and I started doing podcast appearance, and then I got my show on Compound Media, and then I started going on Friday Night Tights, which is very like nerd and gamer based people. It's like that's not something I would have ever, found my way on if I'm not a gamer. It's just, but like there was a need for like they were like, oh, we'll get you on the show because you're funny and you add levity and you keep it light, because those guys can sometimes be serious and get really like dive deep into their criticisms, which is never something I would have seen coming. It's just that you have to keep putting yourself out there until people go, all right, like I like what this girl has to offer, like we'll bring her on. It's just, you just never know. But it's like I kind of vibed with those guys, and that's part of the something else. Even something, like getting into hosting fundraisers or whatever, but just it's going to be a hard road, I think, if you're just grinding it out doing open mics. There are some comics who were like, yeah, I want to get past at every club in the city. And you could do that, which is a big accomplishment, but like you're not going to thrive. Like you could still not have that big of a following. You're not going to be able to sell out clubs on the road. Like sure, you'll be past every club in the city. Great. Maybe you can pay your rent, but like now what? Like you go 2 states over and
no one's going to pluck you like they used to for the most part. No one's just going to see you and pluck you. You really have to seek your own light here. It's like,
you have to like pluck yourself in a sense. Like now it's like you're not going to get booked unless the booker knows you can, like on the road. Like if they, you have to go, here are my numbers, so that they're confident like that you can fill a room and you're not going to be like kind of a waste of time for them. And you're just not going to be able to get the numbers off of just doing stand-up in like a New York City or in LA. There's no way you're going to cast a wide enough net.
Yeah, I mean, social media really is the way. I mean, at this point, I mean, how much would you consider, some people maybe are a little more skeptical of this, to what extent do you consider there to be a whole new generation of comedians who are just making funny videos on TikTok? I mean, social media really seems is opening a lot of doors when you think of it that way. Like when I go on TikTok, half the content on there is garbage and the other half are actually pretty funny little comedy videos.
It's like comedy has changed so much. There's probably less sort of formal, proper stand-ups, but there's probably like a lot more like moms posting videos of them ranting in their car. There's funny TikToks. There's like people doing funny Snapchat videos. There's people that, you know, it's like it's really blown up what is comedy and what can be funny, and like, which is great because you can make it, you know, you could get a tons of fans and following that way, and maybe you make money from TikTok, or you make money from YouTube, like whatever it is, like whatever's gonna get eyeballs on you, and then whatever you do once those eyeballs are on you is like up to you. There's people who don't think like Nicole Arbor is a real comedian. There's people who don't, you know what I mean? Like, not everyone's going to be a Carrot Top, and the time for being a Carrot Top is kind of, I don't know why he's my first example, probably the red hair, but it's like a retro car or something. It's like you know, there's not that many like straight proper stand-ups happening anymore. You can't avoid social media, and most people get into comedy like in their 20s when they're really tapped into social media, so it's like it kind of goes hand in hand with it. Yeah, it's really blown the doors off of what comedy is, and the gatekeepers are less relevant, which is fantastic. And now it's like you don't have to suck up to the Colbert booker to get a spot on Colbert so that you can move ahead, so you can do road gigs. You can just go around all of that. Just get look at Tim Dillon. He wasn't passed at the Cellar. He wasn't passed at every club in the city. He just like started his podcast and then just blew up. And he's got he just like, now he's like, he makes a living being him, which I think is the goal. It's not just like, I am a good stand-up. It's like, no, if you can figure out how to like make a living off of being you, you've won.
Yeah. It's the best compliment that any audience could possibly give you, is just to let you be yourself. That's definitely a great thing. And I feel like what we're kind of coming around to is interesting in that social media, on one side, it really limits what you can do, just because in some ways it limits you because there's going to be all that hate that you're going to get, and people are going to try and cancel you, get you fired from your day job. But on the other hand, it gives you that opportunity to circumvent these traditional systems of, oh, I want to get plucked by, you know, some scout for SNL or whatever. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. The thing that I worry about that is that social media is kind of tilting the scales. For the last like 3 or 4 years, they're actively looking for people that don't follow certain narratives, that don't say the right things, and censoring them. I worry about that. I mean, you mentioned earlier, like I'm sure that my show is being suppressed just because of the stuff that I say on the show. My show isn't a comedy show for what it's worth, but just, you know, for what it is, I know that it's getting deboosted or whatever. It's something, unfortunately, I have to think about. Is it something that you worry about, or that you think new comics, new commentators coming up in the space who want to be a podcaster or comedian, how much do you think they have to think about that? Or do you think maybe it's best to just kind of say, fuck it?
It's so easy to say, fuck it, like you gotta just not care, of course, but I think it's a luxury. You have to work so hard before you can get to a place where you, I think, don't care, because I was someone who always had a day job, and I feel like I always was like looking over my shoulder, like sort of in a virtual way, like, all right, and then it did sort of like reach a tipping point where I was like, I want to do this more than you know what I mean, you realize my priorities shifted. It's like, it used to be like I wanted to keep my day job safe no matter what so I could pay my bills. And then it got to a point where it'd be like, no, comedy is more important to me because it's more important to express myself and like follow this path than to value like my office slave job. That's going to lead to nowhere, where I'm not respected. I haven't had a raise in years. Like, why, you know what I mean? Like, this is not why I'm alive. Like, this is not why I've been given the gifts that I have, is to answer phones and like type emails for someone, you know? But everyone has to like reach that point, and it'll come to you. We're like, okay, how bad do you want this? Yeah, you're always gonna be afraid of like cancellation, and but I think that goes away the more you know yourself, and the more you know your positions and your opinions on things. I think it helps, like, yeah, and a little bit of like not giving a fuck too, to the degree that you can. Maybe that's why. I mean, it never occurred to me to have a stage name, and I'm like, oh, maybe that would have been smart early on. But yeah, it's just so funny because like so many black comics think of having a stage name, like they don't even have their real name. But then you're like, how do I find this person his name? Like, Imagine, who's that? What is this person's name? Who are they? It's out there. It's definitely a fear. It's a concern. and that's something you have to manage, because nobody's forcing you to be in comedy. No one is like, it's you. So it's like however far you want to push yourself.
Yeah.
That's like what's good and bad about it. Like you can every day you can be like, all right, am I going to play it safe today, or am I going to like? And you see where you can, you know. That's why it's like it is easier to do open mics, because most people aren't going to see that. It's probably easier to do that than it is to like do a video that your boss could find, or like post a funny video that could be forwarded. But that's why it's, you know, you can't, like, yeah, be nice to your coworkers, but like don't necessarily just tell them everything about you. Like I learned after a few day jobs, like, yeah, don't tell people you're a comedian. They're going to ask you for a joke right away.
Mm-hmm.
And then it will eventually lead to your downfall, because they'll just be like, oh, you don't want to work in title insurance the rest of your life? Like you want to do something else? You think you're better than us? Yeah. So it's really like a journey and a path that everyone needs to like navigate for themselves, and just pay attention to like what gets your blood going, and like what makes you feel alive. And if it's like taking a risk and saying the honest thing, then just paying attention to that. Or for some people it's like funny. Oh, I like doing funny cartoons, or I like doing funny voices, or I really do this good, you know, Fauci impression. And you start putting that up there. You have to. The only way to pursue comedy is to be like, you have to do it because you love it. Because if you're looking for a quick buck or quick fame, like you have to do. It's like it has to feel like you have a disease. You're like, oh well, I guess I have this for life. I mean, you know, it's like being into comedy is like having AIDS. You're like, well, people can live with AIDS. I know people who are surviving and thriving with it. You can't. It's probably very easy to look at your favorite comedians and be like, oh, yeah, I'm funny. I'm the funniest person in my family or my job or whatever. I want to be like that. I want to be famous. And it's like, you know, you're going to suck for many years. The average time is like 10 years before you kind of find your voice. It's like if you're ready to dedicate 10 years of your life to seeing where this goes, then give it a whirl. But if you're expecting like, oh, well, I better be on Comedy Central, you know, by this time, it's like, sure, have your goals, but keep going even if they don't happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely not for people that want things to be like quick and easy. You got to be willing to take certain risks and to suffer. Like you got to be willing to, yeah.
It is all suffer. It is like 90% suffering for sure. Like it's very unglamorous. It's a lot of hard work. You have to be willing to like, all right, I've recorded my set. Now I have to listen to it and write it down, and then circle what sucked and circle what got a laugh, and then revise it and then try it again. And it just depends like what you want to do. There's some people who I know, they did stand-up, they did like 5-6 mics a night for years and nobody knows their name. But there's this, you know, one guy who did this impression, or this one guy who got on this show and now he's a household name. So it's a real crapshoot. And there's so many comics who are like so bitter and so like, oh, it's so unfair. Why did this person make it? Or this person's not even a real comedian. You hear that a lot from people who are salty about their own lack of success. Like, oh, this person's not even a real comedian. And it's like, isn't success the name of the game? There's this guy who will say, oh, Dave Smith is not a real comedian. And I'm like, who cares what he's going to run for president. Like, he's got a huge following.
He's funny as hell.
He's a force, you know. He's so much more than just a funny guy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you really define your own what success looks like to you, and like do as much as you can. That's why I always had a day job. I was like, I didn't want to be a broke comic, you know, eating ramen every night. That's why I was like, you know what? My parents paid for me to have a degree. I'm gonna have a job until I absolutely can't anymore. So if you and that's like with anything, like let's say you want to start a bakery or start a jewelry business. It's like, yeah, you just start it as a side hustle and then you lean into it and then do your best to try to like turn it into a business.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can, it's nice to hear that somebody else, you know, maybe had a day job while they were pursuing something, because like I do my day job in addition to this show. This show is kind of like a part-time thing for me because unfortunately my day job takes a lot of my energy, but I try to do as much as I can with this. it is kind of like two different routes that you can take, because a lot of people will throw themselves and say, I'm moving to LA, I don't know anybody, I don't have any money, like I'm just, and it's
Isn't that so glamorous? You hear that, you're like, wow, I had $30 to my name. I moved to LA with hope and chlamydia, and look at me now. It's like, all right, not everybody can do that. And some people
sounds
have
like
bills,
the name of
some
someone's
people
memoirs.
have kids.
Hope and chlamydia.
Yeah, hope. Right? Those are going to be the if I ever have birth to twin daughters, that'll be their name.
It's funny, chlamydia is kind of a pretty sounding name if you didn't know what it means. But unfortunately,
just call me Lydia for short. Yeah.
But no, I mean those stories. I always say this. There's what survivorship bias is that we learn so much about these people who have succeeded by moving to Los Angeles or New York with $30 to their name, and what we are not told a lot of, and every once in a while you see a story about it, but the untold story is the 98% of people who do that who end up in a pretty bad way. I've had some real horror stories of people who have said, let me put everything on black, like I'm just going to bet the house on becoming the next Jerry Seinfeld. And it does not end well for a lot of people. It's interesting.
You don't hear about them. Yeah, you don't hear these stories. You just sort of quietly, it's always on Facebook. You go on Facebook, you're like, oh yeah, this person I think quit 5 years ago. So, yeah, that's why I don't like to brag about achievements, because it's like, yeah, everything could all go away tomorrow. And I'm not doing it to brag to other people. It's like, I'm doing it to be proud of myself, I guess, and just make people laugh, make people happy. It's not to impress fucking losers on Facebook.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious these days when people do something just to impress people they don't know on social media. That has become such a obnoxious thing to see. I just there's so many there are people I knew from high school and college where I know how they think. I know what they think is funny. I used to make them laugh all the time. I used to hang out with them. They would make me laugh. And they're on Facebook posting thoughts and prayers about whatever, thing somebody shot, some police person shot
somebody died.
Yeah, somebody died that they don't know,
Boring.
and they must care a lot about that. It always just astounds me. The level of disingenuousness that we're kind of forced to pretend is real is very weird. Something that I say that I think is maybe a little more on the controversial side is that nobody really cares when someone they don't know from a state or even sometimes a country they don't live in dies. No, people will constantly say that there were people in the United Kingdom that said they had to take days off of work and school because of George Floyd's death. And it's just
or the white lady that says to the black guy, I'm so sorry for your loss. What? George Floyd.
Yeah.
I know you're really suffering
and the black guy's
right now.
I don't fucking care.
Did you see I posted a black square? I just want to make sure you saw this. Yeah.
It's that I got to say the George Floyd thing in particular it seemed like all of the girls I knew from college who were screaming the N-word out the window of their boyfriend's SUV while they listened to rap music. They all kind of all of a sudden had a very different attitude towards the N-word and towards racist jokes and stuff. It was all over the course of 3 days, from May to June 2020. Seeing people come out of the woodwork was bizarre, actually. That felt kind of surreal. I know this stuff's been going on longer than the last 2 years. It's been going on a lot longer. But, I mean, do you remember how strange that was? Just kind of that, month? It
was so strange. I remember Black Square Day, very, very well, because I was okay, all my friends are posting this black square, and then I go, this is not sitting well with me, what? And I felt a real resistance to it, and I was let me pay attention to that, and I was just yeah, I shouldn't have to post a black square to prove to people that I'm not racist,
right?
This feels like being
goes
bullied.
Without saying.
This feels like being pressured, and what a dumb thing to have to do to prove myself, and it's so I didn't do it, and I mean, there's so many things I've done that have gotten people to try to cancel me and unfriend me over the years, and now it's just kind of I guess, part of my brand. But it feels good to truly not give a fuck, because the people that have unfriended me over being at January 6th, or people who've unfriended me over not posting a black square, it's these are not your real friends, and these are not I'm looking for ride or dies at this point in my life, and it's if you're not on the team, then.
Yeah.
But sorry, I guess I have no use for you, and it's you're so much of you can go your whole life and never shed these superficial, I guess, acquaintances or friendships, and but that's all. That's how you. It's good to just embrace who you really are, and just not be afraid to lose people. If you're losing people over an opinion, well, then they probably were hanging on by a thread to begin with.
Yeah, I always say, because I've had that experience myself. I had a whole thing when I was in college where I wrote an op-ed when I was in the College Democrats. Yes, I was actually the leader of my state chapter, College Democrats at one point. And I wrote an op-ed in the Huffington Post about Milo Yiannopoulos. I got in a lot of trouble. People wanted me to resign. A bunch of people said they were going to fight me.
What was it?
I
like
wrote probably what you're guessing, which is that I basically wrote like, hey, I'm a liberal and I think this guy should be able to speak on campus without you setting the fucking campus on fire. I think that you should not do that. I think that's bad. And I thought that was a really, like something people could really agree with. I didn't expect it to become a big deal at the time, but it did. And I actually ended up on Tucker Carlson Tonight at one point.
Nice.
If you're curious, I could email Frank the video or whatever, but it's a part of my past that I always remember is the moment I learned who my real friends were. Because in that moment, and I know I've talked about this on the channel before, but man, it was such a big part of my life because it was amazing how much of a dividing line it created in my life where I got a really clear picture of like, there were people who disagreed with what I said, but they were like, hey, you're my buddy. Like, I'm here for you. I'm going to watch you on Tucker Carlson and like, you're my guy. Like, I'm rah-rah, Scott all the way. And then there were a lot of people where they either were outright shit talking me on social media, or they were like liking comments that were shit talking. And I saw those people, but and then I would see those people in person, and I would sense the awkwardness. There was one guy who Scott Veritas is not my real name, but I'm going to use it in this example. He wrote an op-ed after my op-ed that said, I'm a liberal and Scott Veritas does not speak for me. And he wrote it in the school paper as like a dig at me. He was a friend of mine, and I actually called him and was like, you fucking piece of shit. I called him on the phone. I was like, jeez. Yeah, but my whole...
Just the title of that is like, wow, how much power is he giving you?
It was incredible. And the funny thing was this guy ended up getting canceled a year later because he ran for student government, and they found they found him using the N-word without the R on Twitter at one point in his past, and it was very. I can't say that on the show. I know they'll demonetize that. That I know. But in any case, I had this experience of realizing after the fact, after this all kind of blowed over, I was like, man, I'm so glad that I went through this, because I feel like all the people who have been supportive of me, including new people that I'm meeting through this experience, like, people I've ended up having on this show or whatever, like, these are the best people. I mean, they're people that at the very least, they'll hear me say something that they may or may not agree with, but they're not going to hold it against me in this very weird way, especially something as benign as please don't set your school on fire because somebody you don't like came to the school. But yeah, it was that experience is very core to me, and I know it's core to you and core to a lot of people. And I always tell people, please take that leap. Please, please, please put yourself in a position where you are left with the best possible people in your circle. Don't try to hold on to these relationships with people that, But I know we had an hour, Chrissie, so I don't want to bring you too much over your time. I know you got something going on in a few minutes, so... Thanks for being here. Thanks everyone for listening to.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. Let me give you one quick second. Any social media, any plugs you want to do?
Yeah, check out the Chrissie Mayr podcast on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud. I got 4 new episodes a week. The Wet Spot on Compound Media is my sex, dating, relationship kind of advice, like fun, fluffy show. That's Mondays, 7 p.m. Eastern on Compound Media. I have a stand-up comedy album coming out called Live from January 6th. Pre-sales are available now on Amazon and on iTunes, but the album itself drops on March 15th, and I got a bunch of dates coming up. I'm going to be with the comedians of the Compound and Governors in Levittown, Long Island on the 26th, and then I will be at Good Nights in Raleigh, North Carolina, March 17th, the Wormhole in Savannah, Georgia, March 19th, Tampa to do Side Splitters March 20th, and then in Atlantic City with Comedians of the Compound April 22nd and 23rd. And then if you want tickets to any of these things, go to my website, ChrissieMayr.com. Follow me on Instagram at Chrissie Mayr Pod, on Twitter at Chrissie Mayr, that's Mayr, and I think that's about it.
All right, people, check out Chrissie's stuff, and thanks for checking out my stuff here on the Veritas podcast. I appreciate you. You know the drill. 5-star reviews on iTunes. Like, comment, subscribe. You want to hear more conversations like these? I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time on the Veritas podcast.